First of all, Doomies, I want to apologize for getting this video up late. There's just been so much going on in the DC Universe side of things. Check out my video yesterday. It's quite a long, rambly one, but it's all about the new, younger Superman, Henry Cavill, now being gone, amongst all of the other things. Enough of that. Let's get into Doom Patrol Season 4, Episode 3. As usual, Doom Patrol gets wacky in this episode, and they go into the Rita Farr retrospective, which saw us see the Doom Patrol go into Rita's previous movies and genres. But also, what I like about this episode is not only is, we see Cyborg reconnecting with Who Am I Without Cyborg, and that involves him going to reconnect with his previous life, but there's an underlying growth to the threat of this season with that of Immortus. It's still not mega clear yet, and it still won't be, but the seed is most definitely being planted. First, we had that with Willoughby Kipling, not really believing Bunbury, thinking it's just a myth, and it's just like, if this is true, then we are well and truly f***ed. And then in this episode, well, it seems that whoever is working to help Immortus rise wanted something from Rita's necklace. So right at the beginning, we have Rita still wallowing about the fact that the Doom Patrol chose Madame Rouge. But lo and behold, her ego got stroked a little bit because a mysterious flyer arrived at Doom Manor for the Rita Farr retrospective. Very convenient, very random. As I said, it's almost as if somebody's deliberately trying to bring her there. Meanwhile, with Jane, she's in bed, just really struggling and saying to herself, finding a purpose. What the hell does that mean? She has come to realize that Kay, as what we saw last season, is growing up. She's essentially finding her own purpose beyond that of the personalities, and that was further affirmed by the interview that we saw with Vic and Kay that Jane watched at the end of last episode, and that she wants the personalities to find something beyond just protecting her, because otherwise she's just kind of worried what will happen to them. Will they be completely lost? And since all of them, especially Jane, who has acted as primary before, has, had nothing but Kay as her top priority, it is almost an existential crisis when you're thinking, okay, who am I? What is my purpose without that? So this is where Jane has a bit of a fun time for monetization purposes. Even though I'm covering Doom Patrol, literally the ad guidelines are so tight on YouTube, I can't really get into detail here, but she sees the puzzle pieces. One of them had Shelley's eye on it. Now, I don't think that this was very well explained. Again, I could be missing something, so feel free to insert what logic I could be missing, but out of all the puzzle pieces, there is a little piece with Shelley Byron's The Fogs from the Sisterhood of Dada. It was evident that they had a crush on each other last season. Her eye was on it, and it's just like, how did her eye get on that? I don't understand. I know the fog has these kind of metaphysically weird powers to enter your subconscious, and that's why she has that kind of location, that bar, that sweet shop, or whatever it is that we saw last season. But how did she end up on a little puzzle piece here? Like, I'm genuinely dying to know. I mean, I know what they're going for here, and a part of finding Jane's purpose is, I guess, allowing herself to have exploration, you could say, and Shelley's most certainly a part of that. And this scene was pretty wild as well, how Shelley's fog just kind of came out, engulfed Jane in the bubble of pleasure, I guess you could say, and she kind of got taken with that, but then was just like, oh shit. And this further gets expanded upon later in the episode, because essentially Jane, when she's talking to Cliff later on, she details that it's not about whether I like it or not, I have to think about what's best for Kay. So there's almost this inbuilt, I don't know if it's guilt, but she feels like she has this lack of permission to, I guess, live her own life, since she is, I guess, just what she views for now a guardian of Kay's body. But that's when Cliff is just kind of like, no, screw it, how do you feel? Jane just replies, that's the point, I can't forget about Kay. So I think Jane is more or less on this journey about living her own life in this body, even though it is Kay's as well. And since she is indulging in things like, I guess, pleasure and, Shelley, and even just taking that first step out to finding her own purpose, that involves kind of using a body that she's only taken over to protect, but using it for her own purposes. And that is a very bizarre feeling to her, one that I think instinctually to her feels a bit wrong at first, and that's exactly what we're seeing. And again, without giving anything away from future episodes, this most certainly continues to unfold. Now, quite a bit of a side plot for this episode was Vic going to meet his old friends in Detroit. Now, there's clearly that old friendship there, and they almost start as they left off, but there's clearly this energy in the air that's a bit unspoken until they play laser tag a little bit later on. But every now and again, you get the whole Vic this, Vic that, or like, oh, but what happened to your cyborg tech? They're almost like underwhelmed by it. Vic also learns about his best friend Derek, so I guess out of all of them, Derek was the best friend he had. He has a robotics teaching club, and Vic wants to volunteer for that, but Derek is just straight up a bit savage saying, oh no, these guys volunteer. I can count on them. So there is a little bit of tea underneath the surface there, and this all comes out later, of course, during the laser tag, because Vic says, go, I've got your back, but Derek was like, yeah, that's what you always said, until you left. So this is when the confrontation somewhat happens. They air both their feelings, mainly Derek, I guess, and it kind of gives Vic this realization that no matter what his perspective is, and no matter how he justifies it, as he says, you know, I had to mourn my mum and figure out who I was. Now I'm trying to connect to who I was before the accident. You can't always just pick up where you left off. There could have probably have been more communication. Even if they didn't know where he was, they do make it seem like Vic had zero communication, like none whatsoever. Again, Vic has gone back into his past after plucking up the courage over those first couple of episodes of hesitating, and has now kind of had a cold bucket of water just poured over his head, and it's probably a little bit of a shock. So this is going to be something that bleeds out a little bit over the course of the future episodes, obviously. And if anything, I know this is more about Vic finding his purpose, and it's definitely relevant to the arc that his character's been on so far, and last season getting rid of his cybernetics and whatnot, but it also does reflect a little bit of reality. I mean, me being 28, I don't know how old everyone is watching me right now, but I think we can all relate to this in some way or another, where for whatever interpretation of the scenario that has gone down, I think whether it's us, ourselves, or a friend who's just come back after a period of time, or that friend who's gone off when they've gone into a relationship and then things might go weird for them, and then they just come back as if nothing changed and they didn't make any effort. I can understand the perspective of his friends, but maybe they have one perspective, but it wasn't really like that for their friend, if that makes sense. So there's that kind of reconciliation that needs to happen. There's good intent from the person who tries to come back, but then there's the perspective of the people who are just like, oh, I see how it is. We have a great friendship, or at least we did, and let's try and rekindle that, but it's not without the kind of somewhat tea in the meantime. I mean, I could be misinterpreting that, but I think everyone can kind of relate to some extent of what we saw with Vic, and from Vic's friend's perspective this episode. But anyway, as the episode continues, Rita turns up to the Rita Farr retrospective and nobody's there. Look how many buckets of popcorn she's got. But this is when some mist enters the room. It's not the fog, don't be confused there. And no, the fog isn't secretly working with this whole Immortus rising kind of thing. And Rita gets knocked out. So initially we see Rita in her movie, even though she's aware that, oh god, I'm in a movie, she kind of loves it at the same time. As she says a little bit later on, you know, I was enjoying this, but now I'm kind of done. Of course, Rita would love being involved acting in her own starring roles, movies of the retrospective years, right? But Alistair, the guy Alistair, then gives her a jewel to wear, this necklace. Yet the necklace clearly has some little power to it, and at first I think everyone's wondering, okay, so what are they doing? It seems to be filling up with this purpley pinky kind of stuff in there. And before we revisit Rita, this is when the Doom Patrol have a bit of a team meeting. This is after Larry's just getting done with Keeg. Keeg is still kind of trolling around Doom Manor. We still don't truly know what's going on there. But I would say when Rouge comes in to talk to Larry, this is the first like minuscule teaser of Larry finding his purpose, because after all, Rouge literally does suggest this by saying he needs to maybe find new meaning, because in the future Keeg left you, so maybe some new purpose. Anyway though, Rouge starts a team meeting and suggests a team building exercise, and that is through supporting Rita. And this is truly where the fun begins in the episode, because the Doom Patrol all turn up to the Rita Farr retrospective, nobody's there, and as they're watching Rita's movie, and by the way, I love how Larry knows everything that's going on, because after all, yeah, sure, maybe he really does love the movie, but he's Rita's best friend, so you can bet your ass that she's drilled it into him and done a breakdown of every little scene. So it's kind of cute how Larry's like, this is the moment when that character does this. And so as they're watching the movie, this is when the character in the movie known as Oliver starts breaking character, and he says, "Get through the goddamn scene. I haven't seen my family in years. My kids are growing up without me." So again, whatever and whoever, like Dr. Janice behind the scenes is, orchestrating here with that necklace and filling it up. Again, I know a little bit more of an answer to this because I've seen 6 episodes, but again, not giving anything away at the same time. Clearly, and this is genuinely me trying to figure this out, taken people maybe against their will and forcing them to bring about this Immortus Rising plan. Because this guy, Oliver, he's like, well, just do it. Like, he's been told to try and encourage Rita to do this so they can fill up the necklace thingy-majig. But clearly, if he hasn't seen his family in years and his kids are growing up without him, then I can't imagine this is a voluntary position from him. He even goes on to say, "We're all begging you," and then he starts to choke and then he gets popped out. So I guess Dr. Janice was just like, right, you're not executing your orders the right way, as with what we find out Mr. 104 was also a part of, and that's how his character gets introduced this episode. So the Doom Patrol figure out that Rita is quite literally in the movie. They all get sucked in the movie, actually, apart from one, and that is Madame Rouge, and she just flies out of there. And so this is when we go into other genres. So Rita's in one of her horror movies, The Haunting of White Manor. So not Bly Manor, but I did enjoy this. I have to say as well, April Bowlby made me die of laughter when she was like, "This is not the gazebo." I can't remember exactly what the line was, but yeah, I think she is one of the funniest characters on this show. But again, the more I think of other characters, I feel so lucky that they're all just absolutely hilarious. Now, as this new movie unfolds, more of Rita's necklace fills up, I guess the way Dr. Janice wants it to. Now, when we go to Larry, he's actually at the gazebo, and he meets Mr. 104, played by Sendil Ramamurthy. And again, you may recognize him as Bloodwork from The Flash. You may recognize him from Heroes. Instantly, they're talking about how Larry doesn't have human contact and how he used to. Then Mr. 104 goes on to talk about how he's a man of many elements, and he's just actually an innocent soul trapped in here. Just kind of like what we saw earlier with Oliver, was it? Or Alistair, and how he got blinked out of the way because he wasn't doing his job properly. Even though it seems like Mr. 104 stabs the Doom Patrol and Larry in the back a little bit later on. But he is kind of open here, saying our orders are to get your friend to emote as much as possible. And I do love Larry's response about Rita being an actress. That's what they do as soon as they wake up and get out of the bed. So when Mr. 104 was like, maybe the two of us could find a way, I don't know if you noticed this, but Larry got a little bit of nervous energy there. It's like, the two of us? You mean you and I? Then there's a bit of a pause, and Larry's like, lead the way. I think Larry is starting to like a little bit of Mr. 104's energy here, and perhaps he has a tiny bit of a crush. Meanwhile, with Rouge in Doom Manor, she's looking through Niles Calder's old files. She recognizes the name Dr. Janice, but Niles, I don't know, conveniently blacked out the weaknesses that she has. I don't know why he would do that. Maybe it's the files that he recovered and took back from the Bureau back in his day, and they were already blacked out, but Rouge was most certainly blaming Niles for this, calling him a selfish, sex-deprived little prick. And yeah, no, I thought Madame Rouge was really, mainly just Michelle Gomez. She's always funny with the material she gets. She always makes these scenes interesting. So even though I don't think she had a ton to do this episode, it was quite funny seeing her try and just repair this operation that she started with the good intent of supporting Rita, but then just ultimately feeling like everything she touches turns to shite, as she says later. Like, she even lines up shots for every single thing that she's completely screwed up, like, screwing over Rita, getting Malcolm killed, Cliff feeling the pain of violence and whatnot, and the list goes on. Seeing Jane and Cliff, obviously a fan favorite pairing, freaking out in the White Manor was hilarious as well. Initially, they're just like, oh, I'm not scared, this isn't scary, and then when the creepy kid comes out, they're just like, that's not some kid, it's a creepy kid, and they're just trying to comfort each other. They then go on to talk about what we went over earlier, Jane's experience with Shelley. Now, this is towards the end of the episode. Rita wakes up, and it seems to be in a little bit of a Star Trek ripoff. This was pretty funny. The Doom Patrol arrive in their uniforms, and Larry reveals that this isn't a Star Trek ripoff, as as Cliff thinks it was actually Star Trek. It's actually Spartacus 452, her first box office failure. Larry introduces his new friend, Mr. 104, and suspects that Dr. Janice wants to collect your emotional juice in your necklace or something like that. But this is where Mr. 104 says perhaps we need to up the stakes then. He introduces Dr. Janice. The Doom Patrol are then in prison, and Mr. 104 literally uses his powers to start that fire. And this is to encourage the final drops of emotional juice to fill up Rita's necklace, which is when we got that awesome moment of Rita more or less fulfilling her role for Dr. Janice, but saying a speech that was quite touching because it just went on about how much she loves them, and if there's one place that she'll always return to, it's them. But once more, it's important to remember, as Dr. Janice said, that Rita has something that was never hers in the first place, something that was stolen from someone very special, and we intend to get it back. Now, as Rita said, what do I have? It's not made mega clear yet, so it's going to be super interesting to see your guys' theories down in the comments below as to exactly what they're taking from Rita in that necklace. And also, just why is Mr. 104 helping with, you know, this whole Immortus will rise? Because after this was completed, the necklace flew off Rita. Dr. Janice was just like, right, I'm out of here. Immortus will rise. So as you can probably deduce, for Immortus to rise, he and the followers like Dr. Janice are putting to work people who are trying to take stuff like this from Rita, whatever the substancy thing is, to fill up the necklace in order for Immortus to rise or come back or whatever, right? So as Rita rightfully pointed out, so you got what you want and you're just gonna let us all burn. So this is where Mr. 104, nicely of him, I suppose, even though he's the one who set the fire, didn't want to let them burn, so he was like holding the bridge. But the interesting thing I was thinking, and I think this is fair enough, if he can conjure it, as he is like a man of many elements, as he puts it, surely he could have just put it out as well. I don't know. But obviously, if he would have just relinquished the flame that he started with his powers, which I argue he could have, we wouldn't have got that awesome cute moment with baby Keeg just coming in and flying around. So I did enjoy that. I am curious about as to why Mr. 104 couldn't just use his power again to turn it off, especially if he's trying to save them. But nevertheless, Keeg just coming in because earlier we had him looking over all the files and maybe he could read through the blacked out parts. I don't know. Little cute baby Keeg knew a way of how to relinquish this reality that Dr. Janice could conjure up. But very interestingly, this is when baby Keeg just kind of spots Mr. 104 and then just decides to like yeet himself into him. And it's just like, what's going on there? And so the episode ends off on like, you know, quite a bit of like tense music. Cliff is carrying Rita back into the house. Vic said goodbye to his friends and now he's wondering, okay, so what's going on? And it appears that Rita isn't waking up. And so that's where this episode ends. And what I will tell you is that episode 4, as you're seeing on screen right now, I said we're going to get into a little bit of the promo. It is about Casey Brink, and it's a really cool episode, but it's quite self-contained. So I would say for the most part, what you just saw of Rita and the next part of that journey won't really be revisited until Youth Patrol episode 5, which I'm telling you is a very hilarious episode. I think a lot of you are going to enjoy the shenanigans that happen in Youth Patrol. Next week goes to the Danizens, what's going on there. We get to see Dorothy, as you see in this promo. We get to see the introduction of Casey Brink. It's a very comic book cool adaptation of that character, so just bear that in mind next week. It is still just as wacky and weird and bizarre, but what I will say as well, without giving away too much, the plot of it still very much so pertains to and threads along the underlying Immortus thread, if you will. So let me know if you're looking forward to next week's episode with the Danizens, Danny, well, not really the street, the ambulance now, and Casey Brink, Dorothy Spinner through Abby Monterey coming back. And as for this episode, I enjoyed it. I feel like it spent quite a bit of time doing some other things, but that's to kind of further, you know, for example, Vic's story, the character arcs and development they're going on this season, which we've heavily been over, and its core focus is the purpose. Obviously, Jane was getting into a bit more purpose. Larry is only being teased with what his purpose could be. And then also, I don't know how many people are aware of it, even though it felt like the whole Rita Farr movie retrospective was a bit of like a, I guess, somewhat of a side quest and just some funny content, it still very much so was underlined with the plot of Immortus Will Rise. That's what the whole Janice thing was about. She gave that away herself. Immortus Will Rise. She took the little full capsule of whatever's in that necklace away with her. So it did still very much so serve serve the bigger and larger looming threat that the Doom Patrol are facing this season. We've got a new character introduced, Mr. 104. Let me know what you think of him, although we still don't have a major introduction to him just yet. And yeah, just let me know what you thought of this episode. What was your favorite moments? Can't wait to read every single comment. Like this video as well. It really does help me out. Doom Patrol doesn't have a huge presence on YouTube anymore, so I'm one of the few people actually covering the show. But until next week, guys, thank you so much for watching. Hope you all have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you fellow Doomies in the next video. Goodbye.